Today on the Sovereign Sisterhood Movement podcast, we're going to be breaking down this week's astrological update, especially these intense energies between the lunar eclipse in Pisces that we just welcomed on September 17 and the upcoming solar eclipse in Libra happening on October 2nd. This eclipse portal is stirring emotional purging, spiritual recalibration, and fresh beginnings, especially as it relates to your relationships. And today we're going to talk about how the fall equinox that just occurred is serving as a powerful anchor for balance and grounding during this very transformative, life-changing time. We're also going to be looking at our generational healing segment, where we're going to be diving into how trauma gets passed down through our DNA, wiring our brains for anxiety. So many women struggle with anxiety that today, using Kundalini Yoga therapy and A Course in Miracles spiritual psychotherapy, we're going to be exploring how to rewire those patterns at the level of the brain, elevating the consciousness, and finally breaking free from the fear and stress that oftentimes is embedded in our ancestral lineage and in our DNA. And to close out, we will be looking at the Tarot Ancestral Guidance for the week. And this week, a message of connection, of how the current astrological energies are helping you liberate yourself from these programs that no longer serve you, and how the messages from the ancestors this week are going to help you also overcome anxiety so that you can step into your sovereign power. So if all this sounds good, welcome, beautiful sovereign sister, to this week's podcast episode. So we'll begin first with our astrological update, and it's a big one because we are in eclipse season. And to remind you all, eclipses happen, there's eclipse portals twice a year, and they happen always in pairs. This time around, we just welcomed this Pisces eclipse that occurred on the full moon on September 17th, may have been September 18th, depending on where you are in the world. And now we're waiting to welcome this October 2nd full or solar eclipse in Libra. And I want to remind you all that astrologically first, eclipses are seen as times of intense, transformative realignment. Eclipses eclipse people, things out of your life without warning. Although, to be honest, if you're self-aware, you've been getting a lot of signs about this change, about these basically mindset shifts that you need to embrace without feeling like you're being forced into making them happen. Lunar eclipses, they bring a lot of emotional revelations. They bring closures and endings, while solar eclipses, they mark new beginnings, opportunities, and shifts into our true identity, into our purpose and what we're here to do. They often, if not all the time, become these catalyst for speeding up changes and clearing out what no longer serves us. And from a Kundalini Yoga therapist perspective, eclipses represent this heightened spiritual energy, an opportunity for deep transformation, heightened intuition because of the amount of energy or light that is being projected onto the earth, which is very different than any other day when we're not having an eclipse. These energies of the sun and the moon, especially during an eclipse, they're very powerful for what I call a psychic surgery, meaning changing the subconscious mind through meditation. That is why our ancestors were so committed and devoted to their spiritual practices throughout their lives, but especially during eclipses, because these were times where through meditation, they could elevate their consciousness, they could reset intentions, they can connect with higher wisdom so that they can align with the natural rhythms of nature, which is what we're here born to do, but also to advance. I mean, our ancestors were just so advanced technologically, spiritually, and consciousness that we're now just starting to scratch the surface of what it is that they really were all about and what wisdoms they downloaded. Today, we're going to talk about the brain and how the brain doesn't create consciousness. It actually downloads consciousness, and it's been proven scientifically. And our ancestors knew this, and they knew that, especially during times of eclipses and equinoxes and solstices, that meditation was even more potent for us to receive those downloads. And to quickly go over, I know I talked a lot about the lunar eclipse in the last podcast episode, which if you've missed it, go check it out because there's a lot to be said about this lunar eclipse to help you really discern what is going on in your life. But the eclipse portal began with this lunar eclipse that happened on September 17th, September 18th, depending on where you are in the world. And this was a very potent time of intuitive wisdom. As much as typically, the full moon lunar eclipses bring these closings, this one particularly was really emphasized because of the fact that this was the first time that we had seen this lunar eclipse in this axis. The eclipses always are part of a two sign axis, and that are involved with the nodes, the north and the south node of the eclipses. The north node meaning when you incarnated, where you're going, that North Star. South node meaning your past, or your karma, or what your lessons you're here to learn. And this lunar eclipse in Pisces was like this basically new beginning of this axis, where we're now touching on the Pisces Virgo axis, where it's a completely different flavor for the next 2.5 years. And it was really closing out a chapter in her life while starting a brand new one. It's so interesting because the solar eclipse in Libra coming up on October 2nd is really touching on the south node, which is really about our past and our karma. So even though typically the solar eclipses, you're thinking of new beginnings with the new moon, right? This one particularly, it's the south node, so it's forcing us to deal with things that have been happening in our past or in our past lifetimes. While this Pisces lunar eclipse was about the future, it was more geared towards the north node of where it is you're going. So things were being closed out in your life during this Pisces full moon lunar eclipse to help you get to this next level, to help you to get to this authentic era. We ourselves in my community, the Sovereign Sisterhood Academy, we hosted a very powerful rites of passage ceremony on the fall equinox, because remember, not only did the eclipse happen on the 17th, then right on the 22nd, which was a Sunday, we had the incredible harmony of energy being projected onto Mother Earth, of a balance between light and darkness, as we welcomed the fall equinox. And the equinox represents equilibrium. It represents a time where we can reflect on what is needed in our life, what's working. We can reflect between the inner and the outer, the masculine and the feminine, the creative and the logical mind. And so as this eclipse, full moon in Pisces was happening, then followed by this fall equinox, it became like this integration point where between these two eclipses, the equinox is giving us, or gave us, this opportunity to really integrate and take the emotional lessons of the past and the closures that were happening with the full moon eclipse, that were brought up by Pisces and this energy of the shaman, of spiritual intuitive knowing, to really begin to stabilize our energies, to ground ourselves back into our bodies, and to discern and make sense of these downloads that we were getting, because they were very potent. They were beyond the veil. Pisces is the shaman, so there is no veil between the spiritual and the physical. And as we move and evolve as society, there will be no more veil in the next 5 to 10 years, because what is science but the demystification of the spiritual? And at one point that veil is going to be completely gone. And because that's what the Pisces full moon did, as we welcomed the fall equinox, this became like this point of transition, not only from summer into fall, but also from this outer journey to this inner journey, getting ready for the winter. And really, it also is a balance between the spiritual and the physical. And it's in order to help us bring these closures from this lunar eclipse in Pisces that gave us a lot of awareness around our path, where we're going, where we've been, and why all those puzzle pieces now come together. But not a lot of people, especially if you don't have a regulated nervous system, if you don't have a meditation practice, it just becomes another day where you don't allow yourself to grow. And that's why for us in my community, it was so important to have this rites of passage ceremony, because first of all, fall equinoxes, solstices, it's a time to be in community. It's a time to meditate. It's a time to create that psychic surgery on the subconscious mind, so that you get off of those repeating patterns. And when we hosted this rites of passage ceremony, what we did is, like, we brought the ending of a closing of a cycle where we identified to this wounded child, the most common generational karmic pattern that gets repeated in our lineage is childhood trauma, childhood neglect, due to being raised by parents that had gone through their own trauma generationally that they didn't heal, right? And what we did in our ceremony is we released this identity energetically, because that's the whole thing about Kundalini Yoga. It's the science of angles, it's the science of energy. And through these meditation practices, the energy that's being projected onto Mother Earth during the eclipse, during the equinox, it creates these triangles that we can use as portals to then meditate like our ancestors did, so that then we can change our frequency, which is really means release the trauma from our bodies that has been passed down the lineage, and also rewire the brain, rewire the nervous system. We're going to talk a lot about that today in our generational healing segment, so that we can really get off this hamster wheel, because so many people are just so unconscious about their day-to-day life. 90 to 95%, they're just running on a program. And through these rituals and these rites of passages and ceremonies and Kundalini yoga meditation work, we can get off that hamster wheel and we can truly step into our power. Now, I want to prepare you all for this solar eclipse coming up on October 2nd. And we'll have another podcast episode before that where I'll dive deeper into it. But I want you to start preparing for your success, because if there's a reason why you might be feeling even more anxious this week, it has to do with these portals, with these eclipses that are happening. And the solar eclipse that's happening in Libra is all about a fresh start, particularly in areas related to your relationships and harmony and partnerships and justice. Libra is known as the sign of justice. And what we're seeing right now, in addition to this Libra new moon solar eclipse that's happening, is you have to remember that the United States of America is going through its Pluto return. Pluto is in Capricorn right now. It's going to leave Capricorn for 243 years, never to be seen again, in November. I think it's November 18th precisely. But this means that as Pluto is in the last degrees of Capricorn until now, from November 18th, justice is being brought forth to the light. That means, all these celebrities being arrested, all these things being coming to the light about politicians, the healthcare system, pretty much everything that is not working in the United States of America, that has been a facade, that has been an illusion, that has kept people basically suppressed and believing that they're unworthy or not good enough. We all know there's going to be even more things that are going to be revealed. And especially for the solar eclipse happening on October 2nd. I mean, we're seeing already things like Puff Daddy, P. Diddy being arrested, although that's a big distraction too of what else is really happening around. How many music executives are resigning? How many other CEOs of big companies are resigning because of the stuff that's being brought to the light? Justice is being served, and you cannot escape your karma. We're transitioning from the age of Pisces to the age of Aquarius, and as Pluto finally leaves Capricorn into Aquarius, it's going to finish the work. It's going to show us even more where justice needs to be served. So we're not done yet, and this energy is going to be really picking up momentum as we get closer to November 18th. But during this solar eclipse, more justice is going to be needed. More truths are going to be revealed, more shocking things about partnerships, maybe even in your life, relationships, that will be exposed, again, not to be punished, but because 2 plus 2 always has to equal 4 in the universe. And when karma is due, karma is due. We're moving into the age of Aquarius, where it's not one person, it's a community, it's the collective consciousness. It's Jesus Christ is not going to come from the skies and save everyone. It's the Christ consciousness that you're allowing to be born in you through your work of generational healing, of forgiveness, of self-compassion, and living in authenticity. I mean, the people that are being exposed right now, they're not living authentically, and you cannot lie and hide your skeletons in your closet in the age of Aquarius. There's receipts. There's, whether you're talking about the internet or you're talking about actual karma being due, everything is going to be exposed. So through this solar eclipse, you might feel more anxious. You might feel like, oh my God, is the other shoe going to drop? But the reason that it feels that way is because so much is being revealed at the same time. So a lot of people are suffering with what is known as cognitive dissonance. They believe this about a person or about an entity or about an organization or even about a religion, and now you see all the truths being revealed, and to them, and they find it uncomfortable to change their mindset, so they're in deep fear, or they're angry and frustrated because they'd rather continue to live under the veil, or they'd rather continue to live believing that what is being revealed is not true, even though there's evidence galore. So we've got to really work with our nervous systems, and we're going to work with that today to help us really move through all of this massive change, because as above, so below. So if it's happening out in the collective consciousness, and guess what, it's also happening here in your own life, right? So like I said, next week I'm going to be sharing with you a lot more information on the solar eclipse in Libra, and look at the surrounding transits that are impacting it in a very deep way. But for now, I really want to help you prepare for this incredible time to be alive by really understanding that we're all going through a major emotional purge. It's very important for us to continue the work of emotional clearing and releasing karmic baggage from this Pisces lunar eclipse that just occurred, and to really focus on meditative practices. And we're going to talk a lot about that in the generational healing section to help you deal with the anxiety that comes with these eclipses. It's a really important time for you to balance your reflection, to use the equinox, the full moon lunar eclipse in Pisces, and to prepare for this October 2nd solar eclipse by looking at these imbalances in your life, reflecting on the relationships that feel out of balance, looking at your personal goals and this inner harmony, and making sure you're being honest with yourself as it relates to what needs recalibration, what needs to be rebirthed. Because as we step into this age of Aquarius, your old ways of being, thinking, and existing in this world are completely going to fall apart. And that's where a lot of people suffer, because they done this for so long, and even if it's not working or if it's not good for them, how they don't see themselves doing anything different. So it's important for you to ask yourself, where am I out of sync with myself or with others? Those are all clues where they're going to help you really understand what is going on inside of you. Mirror work is very important, shadow work. And what that means is that if somebody is triggering you on the outer world, then instead of blaming them, see them as an opportunity to really find out what's going on inside of you. Because if you're being triggered, that means that something about that person or that situation or whatever's happening, it's an unhealed part inside of you. And that's what the solar eclipse in Libra is trying to help you. It's not that it's trying to punish you by bringing things to justice, or you should be afraid of now being brought to justice for all these things you've done. It's about understanding that this is an opportunity for breakthrough, for incredible liberation, and ultimately this is an opportunity for you to set fresh intentions to really envision how you want to bring balance, harmony into your own life, especially as it relates to the relationships and partnerships, because those are going to be highly affected, even when justice is being served by the same token. The highest form of justice one can receive is being bestowed one's kingdom, because you have healed yourself. Justice is not putting the other person in jail, or making the other person dying, or whatever it is that you think might be justice. Justice is you healing yourself. Justice is you being prosperous, mind, body, spirit, wealth, and health. That's justice. So it's key to have a meditative practices right now, because these eclipses are major portals. They're gateways of emotional release, and they culminate into these major dramatic closings and endings, and also major new beginnings, so that you can realign with your truth. And the equinox only helped us to do this, to reach to this very pivotal point where we can embrace stillness, when we can embrace integration, and use this time to reflect before we fully step into the solar eclipse that's coming up in Libra on October 2nd. So I'll be sharing a lot about that in next week's podcast episode. So make sure you have your notifications turned on so that you get alerted when we do have that new podcast episode available. And now, as we move, from this very profound astrological portal between the lunar and solar eclipses, it's really time for these powerful endings and fresh beginnings. And even though the astrology and the cosmos are calling us for realignment, it's important for us to look at these emotional imprints that we carry from generations before us. In fact, that's exactly what we're going to be talking about next, the very real impact of generational trauma on our nervous systems and brains, and what does that relate to as it relates to anxiety. And before we do shift gears, I just want to make sure that you like, that you share, that you comment on this episode. What's your feedback? How are you feeling these eclipse portals? How did this fall equinox resonate with you as it relates to being a rites of passage of a new era? Let's keep that conversation going in the comments section below, because your experience can absolutely liberate another woman seeking this same path of generational healing. So let's spread the healing. Let's explore together as a movement how we can end the cycles once and for all. So now let's move into our generational healing segment. And this week I want to talk about specifically anxiety and the brain and what that has to do with generational trauma. And I know that you being the biggest advocate for your own healing journey is key, and knowledge is power, but integration is more important. And so today we're going to talk about the brain, anxiety, and generational patterns of trauma. And we're going to look at it from a neuroscientific perspective, but we're also going to look at it from a spiritual perspective, because both are as equally important. And when you really get the perspectives from both scientific and spiritual, it just makes perfect sense how this inner healing work of Kundalini yoga meditation and the spiritual psychotherapy work that our brother Jesus Christ left for us in A Course in Miracles, how together they become an incredibly powerful, potent combination to holistically heal body, mind, spirit, and to disrupt all generational cycles. So before we get into the nitty-gritty of it, I want to talk about the anxious brain and the neuroscience of generational trauma, and specifically what rewiring the anxious brain is all about, because we can look at it both from a metaphysical and a scientific perspective, and integrating both is what's going to help us really understand ourselves and heal ourselves a lot better. From a modern neuroscientific perspective, there's professors like George Church who did this DNA experiment, who basically proved that our DNA can store and transmit vast amount of information. I'm talking about one person being able to store 13.5 billion years of data just in their DNA, supporting the idea that DNA is more than just a biological code. It carries emotional and energetic imprints. Emotions are energy in motion, especially those passed down through generations. That's the science of epigenetics, which you've also heard me talk about before. But 13.5 billion years of data is what your DNA is comprised of. Insane, isn't it? No wonder people are operating 90 to 95% of their day on a subconscious program. It's the DNA programming that we've inherited, but we're not slaves to that. We can change or alter our DNA. And for that, we have to understand the metaphysical concept of consciousness, the nervous system, and the brain, because we can probably all agree that anxiety levels have hit the roof. And what we don't understand is how much they are connected to the DNA, to our generational traumatic patterns. From a Kundalini yoga therapist perspective, we have to understand that the nervous system is not just a physical system, parasympathetic, sympathetic, fight and flight, right? It's actually a conduit for consciousness itself. The nervous system basically acts as a bridge between the body, the mind, and the spirit, and it transmits signals that impact how we experience reality. In fact, metaphysically, the nervous system is known as consciousness. When generational trauma is encoded in our DNA, remember that I was telling you that 13.5 billion years of data, it absolutely affects the brain's ability to regulate fear, stress, and anxiety. And what happens is that this leads to the development of a ton of anxious patterns that get passed down generation, which only is getting worse right now, because not only do we have generational patterns that we're dealing with, but we also are dealing with a brand new phenomena, which is technology. your phone. You consume more information in one day than your ancestors consumed in their entire lifetime just 80 years ago. So what that's doing to your brain, think of your brain as a computer processing system. We've talked about this in past podcast episodes as well. So if you're not upgrading it, if you're not cleansing it and regulating it through meditation, your brain is like a hardware system that is just falling apart. And that's why you are having higher levels of anxiety. That's why we have such a problem with children having high levels of anxiety. There was a doctor who once said that giving a phone to a child is like giving a bottle of vodka to the child. Why? Because of the damage that it does to the brain. And I'm not saying, oh, don't ever use a phone, don't use technology, go all at it, but you need to have preventive practices now that you never would have needed to have even 20 years ago because you weren't consuming that amount of information. You need oxygen to the brain. There's no pills for that. It's diet, but it all starts with meditation. Because if you don't have a meditation practice to regulate the brain, which is really governed by the nervous system, we'll talk a little bit about why that's true right now and why the brain does not create thoughts and does not create consciousness. But if you don't have these preventive practices that you didn't need as much 20 years ago, then that's why you have such high levels of anxiety. That's why you're not focused. That's why you don't feel comfortable in your body. What's really happening here is that these patterns of fear and stress and anxiety that get embedded in the DNA, they're constantly just responding to your environment and creating these anxiety patterns where the nervous system is constantly responding to this trauma. It's a trauma response that's been programmed in you. So essentially, the nervous system just becomes this imprinted with these energetic frequencies because we know it gets wired in the mother's womb, even when she's pregnant. And it's also pre-wired by a grandmother's womb because all of mom's eggs that were going to ever be in her were already in her. You were already in her when grandma was pregnant with your mom. So this influences our brain's response to stress in millions of ways. And the impact on anxiety is that when all of these things come together and then when you don't have a regulated nervous system because of the consumption of information you're doing every day or because of generational trauma patterns of childhood abuse, neglect, all these different things, then what happens is that a brain that is hardwired for trauma, then that generational trauma gets passed down through DNA and it disrupts consciousness. And then you get high levels of anxiety and they become entrenched in your body, mind, and spirit. It shows up as an overactive nervous system. So the body remains like in constant fight or flight, even though it's not undergoing a dangerous situation. It just is unable to switch to relaxation because there's these inherited trauma imprints. Remember, in the DNA, 13.5 billion years of information. The other thing is that there's reinforced neural pathways. The brain continuously reinforces anxious responses, making it very difficult to break free from fear-based thinking. Think of your brain as a information superhighway, and if you've always taken the same route, this is called a program, a generational program in life to get from point A to B, like work, right? You go from point A to B, it's programmed for that. You don't even know it's doing it. You're unconscious about it. So there's streets of generational trauma in the brain that you constantly go through the same streets over and over again because the brain becomes reinforced in these anxious responses. It's like the hamster wheel. We need to throw in a wrench to stop the spinning. And the way we do that is through meditation and through prana, breath, chanting, right? That's part of meditation. Kundalini Yoga meditation, we'll talk about that in a moment, so that you can create new streets, new forms of awareness to experience life through. And even if we haven't personally experienced trauma, our ancestors' pain is encoded in our DNA. So that leads us to carry these fear and anxiety responses in the world, and we become disconnected from consciousness. What's consciousness is the ability to be present in the moment, to be connected with what it is that you're feeling, experiencing, and thinking. And trauma blocks our connection to God, to peace, to love, to being able to live in the present moment. It keeps us trapped in these lower vibrations where fear and anxiety dominate. And when fear and anxiety dominate, then we're not connected to the divine and we're absolutely not living in the present moment. And to better understand this, we have to understand that our DNA stores not just this biological information, but the emotional and energetic patterns, right? From our ancestors. That's why the language of our ancestors is of emotion. And trauma gets encoded in our DNA and it gets passed down. And this causes anxious reactions to situations that may not even have an immediate cause in our current life, but they're linked to this inherited trauma, right? Something happened to you as a child. Why are you still so reactive as an adult in your relationships? Well, because the brain doesn't know time. The nervous system doesn't know time. It believes based on that programming that you're still experiencing that. And the whole thing about consciousness is that we are quantum. The nervous system acts as a receiver of information, a transmitter of consciousness. That's why the brain doesn't create consciousness. And this is proven and taught in universities like MIT. There's a quantum perspective where consciousness is not produced by the brain. It flows through the nervous system, connecting us to the collective consciousness, to God. But if your nervous system has been wired with trauma that is stored in our DNA, then of course you're not going to be able to be conscious. Of course, you're not going to have a nervous system that receives the high vibrational thoughts from God, from yourself. You're going to be perpetuating a ton of anxious patterns. So in this way, consciousness can be actually programmed by ancestral trauma, but it can also be rewired and reprogrammed through Kundalini Yoga meditation. Because rewiring the anxious brain with Kundalini Yoga means specific meditations and chanting and breath that rewire the brain and the nervous system, breaking these cycles of generational trauma, healing 7 generations before and after you. There are specific, what we call kriyas, a recipe of ways that you position your hand, mudra, the way you breathe, what you chant. These recipes then give you a specific result, whether that is releasing energetic blockages that are stored in the nervous system, rewiring the chakra centers, which is our energetic center points that process information, which ultimately these two things impact the brain and the brain's ability to download, because it's not creating consciousness, it's downloading information. And the brain can be rewired if we start at the level of the nervous system first. And that's how, through meditation, you can help yourself in releasing what is known as an anxious brain. It's bringing new neural pathways, creating them through meditation. This is proven scientifically, and elevating our consciousness to a state beyond inherited trauma. Now, spiritually, it's also very important to understand consciousness and anxiety, because what A Course in Miracles teaches us is that this physical body is an illusion. And you know what? Quantum physics is actually proving that too, because quantum physics is saying that consciousness is non-local, meaning it exists beyond your physical form. Your brain does not produce consciousness. It's our anxious brain that is a product of the ego. What is your programming? That's what A Course in Miracles calls your programming to the body, and its identification with fear. That's why so many people live in so much fear of dying, because they believe that they are just a body. They believe that they are their programming. They don't understand that they are a spiritual being having a human experience. And the whole thing is that generational trauma reinforces this illusion that we're just a body, that we're our stories, that we can't change or that we cannot heal, because it keeps us locked in the belief that we're defined by our past and by our experiences of the past. Like, that's why we don't heal, and we stay in these programs of body keeping the score of the trauma, projecting our pain out into the world, and then repeating the cycle over and over again in our lineages. And that's why really the path of healing is through the process of salvation, which is forgiveness. And I know this is hard to hear, and if you're somebody who has gone through a lot of trauma, you might not want to hear this, right? But the bottom line is, without the practice of forgiveness as laid out to us by our brother Jesus Christ in A Course in Miracles, we're not going to be able to end the cycle, because holding on to grievances absolutely sets off your parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous systems. Or your nervous system. It absolutely affects your brain. Yet when we actually do the work of forgiveness, which is what I had to do in order to break these cycles at the core, we're clearing these generational patterns stored in the DNA, in the nervous system. Because if you don't hold grievances, the nervous system changes, the DNA changes, right? And this forgiveness path, and I'm not telling you it's easy, but everything in this world is forgivable. And it's not condoning, it's not you going to make peace and hanging out. A lot of the times it's creating boundaries, right? For me, I was able to forgive fully and unconditionally through this work of rewiring my nervous system, my brain, and then doing the spiritual psychotherapy work of A Course in Miracles to release the grievances, to know that I was not that story of trauma that I was basically living under unconsciously, that I am my true Sat Nam, which is what truth is, my identity. I am beyond the program. I am consciousness. I am spirit having this uh, physical experience, which is why the spiritual psychotherapy is so important. So spiritually, we know that you are non-local, that you're not your body, that you are not the program, which means that any programs you might have of abuse, of neglect, of addiction, depression, these things that get passed down in our lineages, they can be alchemized and changed. It just requires one brave, courageous woman. And that's probably you, especially if you're listening to this podcast episode. Now, we're going to go deeper into more of this, of the brain, anxiety, and how to actually release these patterns in my closed private Facebook group community, which is actually complimentary to all women, the Sovereign Sisterhood movement. So I'd love for you to join me over there. The link is below in the description. Join us there on Wednesdays, 9 a.m. Mountain Standard Time. I actually share with you a live healing session. And this week, we're going to be talking specifically about the brain and anxiety and what it has to do with generational trauma. But more importantly, we're also going to meditate. Every Wednesday, we practice a specific Kundalini meditation to help you become more familiarized and experience the incredible power of this technology, which gets to the level of the DNA. So click on the link below in the comments, in the description, and join us there and ask to become a member, because we are making moves. This is a movement created for all of you. And as we heal ourselves, we heal the world. So it's an honor for me and for me to be part of a community of such caliber. And these women that are part of our community are just beyond amazing. And it's the place for you to start, because right now my Sovereign Sisterhood Academy is not open for enrollment, and neither is Satori Vitality and Spirituality, which is where most women start their generational healing journey with me. So this is a great opportunity for you to join us at maybe as a novice or beginner, to really get more your feet wet and to start to understand what generational healing is all about. Now, we've talked about this week's astrological update. We looked at the anxiety in the brain and consciousness in the nervous system. And now I want to share with you this week's ancestral guidance, because it really does fall beautifully in alignment with the things that we're talking about this week energetically, and also generational healing. So the first card that we got, interestingly enough, in the immediate past was the Nine of Swords. Now, there's no good or bad in my opinion, especially as it relates to readings, but it did come reverse, which to me means in the past we are coming from a moment of healing where we were releasing deep-seated fears. There were worries, there were anxieties, there was mental anguish, as you can even see in the picture. But reversed is like we are now easing our way out of this emotional distress. We're starting to find relief. We're realizing that our worst fears not only did not materialize, but that they will never materialize. We're starting to put the puzzle pieces together from our past, where we've been facing inner turmoil, where we've begun to confront our own inner demons. This card is all about us having maybe some lingering fear, regret, maybe a little bit of guilt that might require your attention. But in either case, you're transitioning, or you're coming out of this period where you were overwhelmed with a ton of negative thoughts, where now we are needing to continue to work to fully heal. I tell this to my community all the time. The healing journey is never ending, because the healing journey is the journey of evolution. And sometimes, you say, I want $50 million, or I want this relationship, right? Well, the work really begins when you get the $50 million or the relationship, because how are you going to sustain that? How many people get the relationship and end up divorced over and over again? Or how many people get the money and end up broke again over and over again? Why? Because it's not enough to put the energy to acquire it. It's like, how are you going to sustain it? And that's what this card is saying. Look, you're coming from a period where you did a lot of inner work, a lot of shadow work, you forgiveness work, right? But right now, it's a good time for you to lean on others for emotional support, because even though you've managed to navigate through these recent worries, right now you reaching out to a community, being part of a community is going to help you continue to share these feelings and continue to sustain the frequency where you really feel that you've overcome the self-doubt, where you really feel that you're broken free from these cycles of insecurities, where you've experienced this time of, yes, a lot of anxiety, but now you're beginning to see the light at the end of the tunnel. And that's beautiful for our immediate past, because in the immediate present, the card that we receive is the Two of Wands. And this is in the upright position, represented by the Aries energy. What is Aries? Our true identity. So the Two of Wands is now telling us that in the present, we're coming into this moment of planning and progress, where we're in the midst of just creating this next steps of vision. So this is a time for you to strategize, to really look ahead 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, where you're now beginning to see the potential paths in front of you, thanks to this full moon eclipse in Pisces and to this fall equinox, right? You're looking at, how am I expanding my horizons? Where am I going? You're making major decisions because you've been at a crossroads, and you're choosing now to get out of your comfort zone, and you're moving into the unknown, whether it's a new job, it's a new relationship, maybe you're moving to a new country. In either case, you're being encouraged to take this broader view and to think about all of your long-term goals and the decisions that you are going to need to make from here. This is the card of possibilities. So this is saying that we have a ton of options, and whether they involve traveling or starting a new project or entering into a new relationship, right now it's important for you to become more still and to visualize, what do you want for your future? And what do you want from your heart, not from your ego, not what society expects from you, not what your parents expect from you, not something based out of your old programming. It's like, take control and use your personal power. What do I want? What's going to make me the happiest? Because this is a card that reminds us to trust our instincts and to act with a lot of confidence. So as we move from the present energy of the Two of Wands, in the future, the ancestors are talking to us about the Eight of Wands. Now, this is reversed. And what this card is all about, reversed, is there could be some delays. You might actually be slowed down. And you know what? That's not a bad thing, because even if the plans are not unfolding as quickly as you'd hope, what you're being asked is to surrender to patience and flexibility. Infinite patience produces immediate results. In the future, because of all this planning and visioning that you're doing, you need to be very careful about your scattered energy, because you might feel that your energy is spread too thin. Maybe you have too many tasks, too many goals because of this new awareness that you received. So what we're being advised in the future is to focus our efforts on 1 to 2 key areas rather than to attempt to juggle it all. Learn to basically give other people tasks to help you, but focus on what is moving the needle, whether this is a new project, a new business. Learn to delegate what you know you shouldn't be working on and stay focused, because in the reverse position, whether there's miscommunications, there's obstacles, it's important for you to be very mindful about what you're doing and how you communicate with others, so that in the future here, as you step into it, everything has been double checked and everyone is on the same page. Remember, Age of Aquarius is community. You're not going to do this alone. This is why more than likely, you're being asked to revisit your plans. You need to reassess your approach, what you were doing to get here before. How can you make that better, more effortless, less hustle, and more alignment? That's what this card is really all about. So the obstacles or the delays that happen with this new life that you're entering to, these are very important times for you to reevaluate. So if things aren't moving as planned, what a blessing. It's important for you to then consider how are you going to adjust your course so that you better align with your current situation. And that's what this week is all about. It's, can I realign? Can I slow down enough to integrate so that as this October 2nd eclipse comes, I can really understand the lessons and I can understand my path and my North Node in a lot more clear way. So in summary, what we're being told this week is to really look at the opportunities in front of us while we're breaking free from a ton of mental barriers, and we're also planning for the future with the Two of Wands. Patience is going to be required as we move through any delays, any obstacles that arise. It's important right now through these three cards, the ancestors are saying to trust in your ability to navigate these challenges with wisdom and know that the path forward, although not very sometimes certain, or maybe there's some hiccups, is full of growth and opportunity. And why? Because of this. Because you took the time to face yourself. And that's one of the things that I keep repeating in my community to the women of the Sovereign Sisterhood Academy and Satori Vitality and Spirituality. Like, we've stepped into this new era where we no longer have to be afraid of the other shoe to drop. Why? Because we've regulated our nervous systems. We rewired our brains. And we've come into this holy relationship with ourselves, which ultimately means a holy relationship with God. And that's a level of sovereignty and power that we all deserve and have within us, and that we should never, ever be afraid of. I know this has been an incredibly jam-packed episode, and I know that we've covered everything from the power of these eclipses to the fall equinox to this deep healing work of generational trauma and the neuroscience of the brain and the nervous system and the ancestors' guidance, of course. And there's a lot more to unpack, but what I want to leave you with is this is a pivotal week to be honest with yourself, to surrender to what's being shown to you, and to not be afraid to go within. If today's episode resonated with you, I invite you to join us in our closed Facebook group, the Sovereign Sisterhood Movement. You'll find the link below, where we're diving even deeper into these topics, specifically focusing this week on how anxiety and the brain are impacted by ancestral trauma and what's the solution. How do we change that so we can break the cycle at the level of the root cause? Join us there, link below. And of course, if this episode resonated, if this incredible journey of generational healing calls to your heart, hit that like button, comment below, and share it with another woman in your community. As we heal ourselves, we heal 7 generations before and after us. And also the world heals. Until next time, take care of your beautiful mind, body, and spirit, and stay sovereign, sisters. I'll see you on the next episode. And thanks for liking. 7.